welcome to the EdTech podcast. As I record this, we're slap bang in the middle of the summer holidays here in the UK. As is traditional, we are enjoying a severe weather warning, which basically means it's a little bit blowy and raining slightly. How is it where you are? And what did you think of our new podcast series trailer? Tweet us where you're listening from and what you're doing at Podcast EdTech. Some very sad news as I record the introduction to this episode. I was shocked and saddened to open one of my favourite newsletters, Doug Belshaw's Thought Shrapnel, and to read about the passing of Di Barnes. Di was the head of digital strategy at a UK school, and Di and Doug co-hosted the Tide podcast. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting Di, but the Tide podcast was introduced to me in the early days of the EdTech podcast by Joe Dale and Stefan Kasper, both previous guests. Di's passing is obviously a huge loss, both to his friends and family, but also within the education podcasting community, and I can only imagine what it's like to lose a co-host, someone you collaborate with and share all your thoughts with. Di Barnes was a big enthusiast for barefoot running, and I encourage you all to go and look up the hashtag Barefoot for Di, DAI, which shows all of Di's friends and followers showing themselves walking in various places around the globe barefoot to remember him and the impact he had on them. Our thoughts are with Doug Belshaw and with Di's family and friends. A few other announcements. If you're on the tech side of things or maybe a teacherpreneur looking to start your business, Lucy Lynn Matten from Emerge Education got in touch as she has built a tool for current or future fundraisers featuring a database of all VCs that have invested in European EdTech since 2010, and apparently there are over 500. The link to access the tool is available within our show notes at theedtechpodcast.com/edtechpodcast. If you're interested in events, keep listening until our outro, where we also list what's coming up and how you can track upcoming events in our calendar. Right, this week's episode. Another peek into the world of higher education, but with lots of transferable skills, whatever education hat you might be wearing. We throw back to a recording at Future EdTech, where I ask a live panel how to develop the team who will deliver change. And we think about this within institutional capability and leadership development for the 21st Century University. You'll hear from me, Debbie Holly, who's Professor of Learning Innovation and the Head for the Centre for Excellence in Learning at Bournemouth University, Chris Cobb, who is Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Deputy Chief Executive of the University of London, Wendy Purcell, Professor of the T.H. Chun School of Public Health at Harvard University, Jane Armstrong, a Senior Director within the Higher Education part of Salesforce.org, and Andrew Turner, the Associate Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Teaching and Learning at Coventry University. We talk about why doing nothing is embracing the status quo, whether it's okay to say I don't do tech, and why downloading board papers digitally shouldn't be beyond the university SLT. We also think about value and why there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to university. I especially enjoyed listening back to this recording as I come to the end of reading the book Econocracy, which I would encourage you all to check out if you're interested in the tussle between liberal education and university as a bridge to work. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Send us a picture of where you're listening in via @PodcastEdTech on Twitter or Instagram, and have a great week. Well, hello and welcome everyone again to Day 2 of Future EdTech. The first part of creating change is having a seat at the table, so well done for turning up, and you guys are obviously the early adopters this morning. Yesterday I met people who travelled from countries including Holland, Dubai, Bahrain, the USA, so a big welcome to anyone who's travelled from further afield. And I even managed to meet one of those listeners from Australia, so that was pretty amazing. Yes, just to remind everyone, the hashtag is Future EdTech. And I just jotted down a few of the takeaways from yesterday. So there's 4 of these. So number 1 is there was obviously quite a division still, it seemed, between SLT strategy or senior leadership team strategy in the universities and perhaps faculty implementation. It struck me that the personality mix on your change team can make or break a programme. So that's quite an interesting idea that, the right people in the right place at the right time. It's that strange alchemy that can make things happen. There are a diversity of university models. So I know yesterday people were quite aghast at those that tied industry and employability can perhaps go against some of what we think sometimes. But then I also thought, well, for those people who've been less well served by the traditional university model, that idea of making every penny count and getting a job at the end is actually really very important for them. So, there's a diversity of university models and each one is valid. And finally, everyone seemed to agree that where there is finally consensus to change, there needs to be less bureaucracy and red tape to actually getting that done. So it made me think, perhaps is that an area where EdTech could actually assist in making that more efficient? But this morning we're here to talk about developing the team who will deliver change. And I think for those of you who are passionate about actually getting stuff done in the universities, this hopefully should be a really exciting panel. So my first question to the panel, which of the capabilities needs to create and sustain a 21st century university? And perhaps I'll jump to Andrew for that one, because we had an interesting chat this morning about agility and perhaps how that might work in a university. So
yeah, it's a tricky one. I think for me, I think for a university it's having an entrepreneurial mindset for the university at probably every level of the university, and trying to embed that throughout a university. And by what I mean by that, I think if you look at risk at the moment and you look at the uncertainty in education, the risk is not doing anything. So actually, I think it is about responding to change. And I think an entrepreneurial mindset means really, as a university, you're always looking for opportunities. You're aware of what's going on. And we talk at Coventry about the Coventry way, and that's about partnership. And I think forming partnerships with business, forming partnerships at every level of the institution is really important. Heidi from the University of York yesterday talked about the standoff between academics and professional staff, and I think at the lowest level where we're delivering, right at the heart of things where we're delivering courses, one of the things that I think is really important is a partnership between academic and professional services staff. You have to work together, and that goes for every level of the organisation, from the very top team all right down to the course teams, where you've got those partnerships coming together, and then partnerships beyond the university as well. So I think that entrepreneurial mindset, being able to lead in an entrepreneurial way in an institution is really important for change, looking for those opportunities, creating environments for change as well, a willingness to take risks as an organisation, and willingness to empower teams at whatever level of the organisation to lead and for change.
Fantastic. And Wendy, we spoke previously about this idea of academics and sort of professional support staff, and whether there's that division. What's your view on how well that partnership works, perhaps at a board level as well?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I came to this conference in 2016 and talked about this radical decision that we'd made to put our CIO on the top team as a strategic animal. And yesterday I was in the VC senior leadership lunchtime meeting, and we took a straw poll to see here we are in 2019 with all the things that are happening, and still so few of those CIOs who are really strategic animals were on the top team, and that to me is really disappointing. And it's kind of created a sort of sense that technology is something that you instruct to do something, as opposed to being able to illustrate the art of the possible, and thinking about your business and your university in a very different way. And so that's one of the things that's quite disappointing, that sense of embracing the bridge between what faculty are really passionate about and how professional services staff actually help to realise that and are very much active players, as opposed to being outside the room waiting for the white smoke to go up, and being passive. And made passive structurally through that team dynamic. I think that's really interesting. There's a lovely little article from the Harvard Business Review several years ago which talked about the corporation is at odds with the future. So it talks about the corporation, an institution, being structured and bounded and all the things that we talked about yesterday that were kind of curtailing or strangling innovation, and how the future is really amorphous and unbounded, and therefore how can both faculty and professional staff come together to bring bits of the future in to their organisation and have a kind of learning mindset, as opposed to these big kind of institutional change programs which are take so long. By the time you get it signed off, it's completely out of date. So how can we become much more agile and much more innovative, really, at bringing bits of the future in and trialling and testing and learning? And I think that's the piece for me, is how do we bring those the talent of our organisation together, irrespective of what label we're wearing, for the good of the organisation, really.
So that's very interesting. I'd love to come back to the point about bringing outside expertise in. In terms of that sort of process and structure, Debbie, perhaps you can talk about your experience, because I know we talked before the event about whether this sort of delivery of change. Some universities go around about it in a sort of centralised manner, and some more localised in their team. So could you share your experience at Bournemouth University?
Yes, at Bournemouth we've got, like a lot of other universities, a huge building programme, a huge investment programme. We procured a new VLE, and what we started off with was doing one of the Changing the Learning Landscape scoping pieces with Advanced HE, JISC, ALT, National Union of Students and the Leadership Foundation. And then we sort of drew in a lot of stakeholders to influence the next steps. And we tend to use the new buildings, the new VLE, as kind of catalysts for culture change. And I think it's getting the culture change piece in as part of the tech change and innovation that pulls together and operationalises those partnerships that Wendy's just described. So, you have to do your basic VLE training or whatever, but we actually invested in having academic learning designers on 2-year posts coming and working with faculties to show the art of the possible. So to really stretch and to show how you could engage students in the classroom, and to get that change, our central unit is academically led. And I think that makes quite a difference. I know there's different models in different universities, but at Bournemouth, to get the buy-in for the faculty-facing change, you have to have the academic leadership. And we work very, very closely on the committees with our professional colleagues. But to actually get that transformational change at student level, it really has to be, I think, a partnership model.
Very interesting. I think if anyone's here and saw Stefan speaking yesterday, I'm not sure if he's here today, but I think that was sort of a version of his role at University of Southampton before he went to Carnegie Mellon. So that's interesting. So that's sort of the centralised approach. Perhaps for Chris and Jane, there's also the idea of, if you're partnering, where you're choosing perhaps partners with, if you're talking about digital transformation or that kind of thing. With the University of London, you've got a huge set of universities, each with their own culture and values. So then how do you create that sort of value while seeking to implement change, perhaps, and make the most of efficiencies across your university?
The University of London is very decentralised. Each of the member institutions runs their own affairs, and I was at one of the member institutions at the start of my career and actually divorced its systems from the central university, so I've seen it from both sides. The centralised services that we offer now are very much on the basis of a service to all, and actually we have over 100 universities buying into our services, mainly virtual learning environment services. And it's very much on the basis of a thoughtful, understood implementation of an environment that we're very familiar with to organisations that we're very familiar with, and the organisations are buying into this because of that thoughtfulness and because of that sort of understanding. But there is an economy of scale, there is a critical mass component. Can I come back to some of the earlier questions, Sophie? And one of the key things I think is about to get change brought into across an organisation, it's a common understanding of what the need is and the imperative. And often the leadership team have that understanding, but the rest of the organisation don't. Mm-hmm. And I think that's core to all of this. And sometimes it's around an outside influence, additional regulation that you have to jump through, additional piece of information that you need to have. And sometimes it's about actually the size, shape and purpose of the organisation. And you get those opportunities every sort of 5 or so years when you redefine the strategy. And getting people to buy into that new vision. Are you going to sort of change the way you teach, like Northampton have, where they've actually built a whole campus where it's digitally enhanced from the get-go, and the teaching rooms are of a size that aren't going to accommodate very large lectures because that's not seen as being the future and so forth. Getting the academic buy-in for that is really important. And I don't think those things happen very often. The other thing that I think we've got to make a distinction of in information technology are the administrative systems and the academic systems. I generally think that academics could care less which HR system we've got and how long it's. I mean, as long as they can book their leave, then that's fine. Where the really touch points come is where the IT affects the academic life. Now that might be around which research systems that they use, or it might be more commonly around the learning environment. And I think we've gone through that generational change of virtual learning environments, and there was a really big sea change about 15 or so years ago when they were brought in. The next big threshold that I think we're going to have to sort of encounter with that academic interface and IT is around assessment. And I think that is, and that's where artificial intelligence comes in and so forth. And I think we've got a really big challenge ahead with getting academic buy-in to a more efficient, perhaps a more robust, perhaps a better quality assessment environment that's IT driven, because there's a really big culture issue there, and getting that culture change is going to be really significant.
I think there was an organisation from the Nordics here last year called Peer Grade, where essentially students mark each other's work, so it'd be interesting to get some academics along to see what they think about that. Jane, from the outside as a partner, how do you help work with these universities to essentially assist with this very difficult issue of delivering change as a partner? So is that about, supporting staff and student digital capabilities, or can you tell us a little bit about where, as Salesforce in higher ed, you would fit into this piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, so very much like the rest of panelists here have talked about, I do believe fundamentally it is about a partnership. And that's very much our vision within the company, that it's businesses, that can very much be in partnership with industry to impacting, that we can be sharing and being that forum for collaboration and sharing the best practices. And what our customers often tell us is that change will start often, and not surprisingly, within one area, one business unit, one division, and very much aligned, Chris, with what you were talking about with the larger term strategic goals of that institution. But it can be almost that decentralized, side of the institution, while the top up and also driving from the bottom down to influence change. And having experienced this firsthand within higher education, as I worked many years within recruitment and admissions, that's where we started driving some of this change and being able to demonstrate this. But I think that very much the power of technology is being able to also leverage that data to lead with the analysis and to actually show change through the insights and how you're able to use that to make the strategic decisions for the institution and for the university, and really continuing to put that student at the center. I mean, it's very easy for us to be talking about that bureaucracy, the staff and the administration and the tension and ties, but I think we sometimes miss that all of this is for the student and what do they need, and how are we delivering a really personalized, continuous, proactive experience that's very much relevant to them and what their needs are. And like we said already this morning, we saw all these different models in place. Well, how do you then customize those models? How do you deliver that for your institution, your students? And I think also from a technology company, what we're starting to do is take much more responsibility. I mean, I appreciate the comments yesterday morning around, technology and that we can be these big firms, but I think increasingly we are seeing it as our ownership to also deliver some of this to upskill institutions as well, whether that's through our own bespoke badges or modules that are complementary to help staff, to help institutions understand and to become more, these embrace digital transformation more holistically.
I mean, I think it's really interesting because it's, I guess it's the question of if we're going to affect change beyond faculty level only to more across the university culture, when's the point to bring outside expertise in? So I interviewed Jane Bunce, who's sat opposite me over there, and I remember, with that change management program about launching the new campus, there was, we talked about the need to bring everyone and make sure everyone's on the same page. So, do you need a comms team to help with that, to actually help with internal communications? And then, Andrew, we had a conversation this morning about, perhaps it's unfair to expect people to come up with, these huge projects, carry on with their day-to-day work, and then also project manage them. So you actually sort of outsource or have an inside team, to help with the project management.
We have a program management office, which is actually quite a large office now, which manages all the major programs with the institution, and that actually brings all the people in that office are from business. They bring in outside expertise into that, and so it's about financial control, but it's also about task management, and that's really important in bringing diverse teams together across the institution. But underpinning it, you've got somebody that's managing that, keeping it on track and aligned to the institutional direction, the institutional policy, and actually the financial controls around that are really important. It's a challenge for those people coming into an institution because they always say, universities are really complex organisations, and it is very hard to get an understanding of all the processes in the university. Once we're there, actually, it's really effective in being able to drive change, being quite agile. So we've had set up a number of subsidiaries which we've done in a very short space of time, bringing that industry expertise in to be able to set up these subsidiaries. We've recently set up CU Online, Coventry Online operation, and that was done really within about 3 months of bringing about 70 staff in to do the build around programmes. And by having that expertise, it allows you to move very quickly.
Can I ask how many people from universities here have a sort of programme management team in the same way to actually, keep on top of the tasks? So we've got, okay, so about probably a third of the room. Okay, interesting.
Just pick up on that, Sophie, that I'm always really struck when we talk about kind of organisational change, and I've got this in my slide deck when I do sort of work on transformation and stuff. It's like organisations don't change, people do. And I'm really struck at how long we kind of pore over specifications and take papers to boards and think about procurement, and how little we think about the investment we need to make in our people to realise the benefits of this. And I'm also struck that how much we're thinking about whether we make a decision or whether we invest in this thing, and how little we think about, that if we don't, not making a decision is making a decision to embrace the status quo. And when you push back and say to people, okay, so we're not progressing with this, so you realise that we're embracing the status quo as fit for purpose. Did you realise that's the decision you've just made? People go, oh, hang on a minute. And so I think there's something quite fundamental about how we frame some of the discussions around change and how we think about our people as the instruments really by which change happens, and how little we invest in that. And then you get into this blame culture that I think we saw a little bit yesterday, of the word they as applied to faculty, and I could feel myself bristling a little bit and thinking, they aren't the problem, they are the why of your institution, and so therefore let's really think about that. So I think there's something quite important about organisational change. Stop saying that. Talk about how people change, how you invest in your people, and how embracing the status quo is a decision. It's an active decision you've just made, and so let's think about that as well.
No, absolutely. I think someone yesterday sort of said how, talking about bristling, VC came in from the kind of business world, and it was absolutely abhorrent, and it made me think of sometimes we criticise politicians for not having any real world experience. So is there room to kind of open up this idea of external expertise, and that's perhaps slightly different to what we're traditionally used to in a university, and whether that's board of governors or whatever it is? But I just wondered if anyone has any strong opinions on that.
I think so. I think that goes to the board level, in having that entrepreneurial mindset right up at the board level. It's got to be there really to effect change.
And to what level is this about sort of digital capabilities? Because I actually qualified my first question just to capabilities, because actually there's a whole other set of capabilities needed. But, JISC have their sort of digital capabilities programme. How much of this is happening at universities to actually make sure that everyone's got these sort of digital leadership skills at their fingertips?
Bournemouth, we've done a huge amount to start to have a look and to look at using the digital tracker, and then trying to use the outcomes of that to refine the way that we design our curriculum. And I think they're a really, really good set of tools. And sometimes it's easier to bring expertise from outside into the institution and for it to have value, because sometimes the internal champions, you're just the internal person. So I think the partnership and the evidence bases are very, very significant. And then also linking with the current policy framework. We've done a huge, like very many others, looking at our academic advisor role, and there was initially quite a bit of resistance to that. But when you actually talk in relation of the Office for Students and the metrics and the way in which that we're all measured, it's trying to put that in the wider context to explain why these changes are taking place. And I think the policy pieces internally are a huge part of the culture change model.
Okay.
If I may come in, and then, I'll be brief. What I also see is a rise of not only the CIO, Debbie, which you were mentioning, and you were touching upon also the Chief Marketing Officer, but now Chief Digital Officer, right, for the entire platform. And now it's thinking about, well, how do all of these individuals integrate, right? And they're the ones who are often bringing in that outside perspective, because they've driven these change programs at other institutions and organizations. Schools are looking to them then to be able to bring this insights, and you're absolutely right. Sometimes they're seen as the outsider in and can drive this and can leverage models from, it could be banks, financial services, it could be healthcare, it could be other, not-for-profit or areas and industries that are really interesting. So, Chris, I'll let you continue on that.
No, I think there are all sorts of different externalities that an organisation is influenced by. I mean, you've got in the leadership team, you don't have to recruit from within the sector, you can recruit from out. Your governance, you certainly have to have a lot of external influence there. And also you can buy in externality in terms of project management or consultancy or advice. What I would say across all of those, particularly around the governance, is that you have to have a range of things, and to focus on one particular skill is just wrong. So, you need to have people that are expert in law, expert in finance, expert in internationalisation, alongside those with the digital. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to have awareness of each of those things, but you need the experts there too. And that's why you have the CIO at the table alongside the registrar responsible for regulation and so on, alongside the head of research. It's the complementarity of all of that. So we mustn't sort of focus on digital. We've got to, I think, understand that it's a team.
Completely agree.
Just to pick up on the governance part, particularly university boards, I'm just very struck at how ill-equipped many university boards are, for this kind of industrial revolution 4.0 and 5G and all of that, when they can't even download a board paper from a Google Docs space. And I just wanted to share a monumental fail of when we tried to have our students mentor the board. So each, a student was kind of paired up with a board member, and to show them how it was to be a student and to work across platforms and to assemble our own content and all of that, and just how that monumentally failed as the board members tried to kind of teach them things or show them, take them out to dinner and stuff. So, there was a real sense that they just did not have a window into the world of how students were learning, and therefore their ability to make decisions at a governance level about how the business model of an institution was changing, albeit an academic institution. I think there's some real investment needed there to show boards, to think through with boards how the governance, needs to be strengthened to embrace. Andrew mentioned it, earlier, risk and their risk appetite for some of these spaces.
Okay. At that junction, I would love to throw this open to questions from the floor. So we have some, I think, on Glisser. So if I go Abakasam, something like that. There we go. To Coventry University, how did you get approval for the project management team? So I guess that's a wider point of, any tips on actually getting some of these pieces going and through all the approval processes?
It was a strategic decision to go with that to effect change rapidly, and we have a set process really for presenting the business case and putting that forward to the board. I think one of the things is the confidence to invest. Once you've made that decision, it's the confidence to invest and go for it actually, and be bold in the implementation of that. And I think somebody else said, you said about not doing anything actually once you decide to go for it, then it's about investing properly and actually going for that change. So I think we have, yes, getting approval and procurement of, can often take some time, but we have quite an agile process where the board gives that approval, and then actually it's a confidence then to progress that.
Okay, thank you. Another question: how do we measure value for money on the investment of the changes? So I suppose you've got, in the administration side, and then teaching and learning. I suppose, how do we measure those? Anyone want to take that question?
I'll just take one stab at it. It's not to give an answer; it's just to really give another question. But we talk about ROI, and I think we really, really super focus on the I bit. And so it's, whether it's 1.71 million or whether it's 1.714, so we'll keep that going backwards and forwards, and so we'll talk about the investment piece. And I think we're pretty poor at the R bit, which is what is the return we're expecting. And one of the disciplines that we saw from the PMO, so the Project Management Office, was that it made us focus on benefits realisation. And so, can you fully articulate the benefits that you wish to be realised? Do they align strategically? And so we got better and better at the R bit. And so I still think that in this kind of value for money, the return on investment, what are you looking for? We're still pretty poor at the R bit and the discipline that you need to articulate the R, your return. And we focus overly on the I bit.
I'd agree with that. I think the business cases that come forward for the investment have to have that benefit. But I've also observed over the years that because these system implementations take a while, circumstances change, and the benefits that you anticipate at the start are not necessarily those that you're able to realise at the end, and a lot of the capacity that you might have expected out of the system has been absorbed by other requirements.
Okay. Jane,
I was going to say, I think, again, being the technology company, it is being able to lead with that data, right, and being able to show that impact. Again, if I just take an example of recruitment and admissions, it's very easy to measure the number of students who might now be following you on social or who are more engaged, or how it's related to your applications increasing, assuming that's what your goals are for an institution. It's all going to depend on what you want to be delivering in line with your strategic plans. And I certainly agree that on the R side, and being clear on what returns you want and being able to set that metrics up, but it should very much align with that longer term vision, and knowing that this is a journey, right? Is the journey of change that you have to embrace upon, but being able to lead with those insights to be able to align that with strategic goals, and having the data to prove it is valuable.
Okay. I was curious to know if the panelists had any other examples of either sort of successes in this idea of creating change beyond beyond pockets of innovation, and then either, or if you're more comfortable with it in that British way, failures as well. So we've had a few of both, but if there are any more lurking there, let's get them out in the open, because we can all learn from them, I'm sure.
I'll start you off then. In terms of one of the major concerns in the sector has always been the not invented here syndrome, where you may have something that's perfectly adequate, it's really, really good, but you've got to spend ages kind of bespoking it and kind of really making it. So the not invented here syndrome for me is a major issue. And I think working with a lot of businesses, good enough, and that sort of space, and then there may be something where there's a white label and you put something over it, but I think we do so much of reinventing and duplication, and there's so much waste in the not invented here syndrome. Well, it might be okay for so-and-so university, but I don't think you quite understand us, and so that not invented here syndrome is a real issue, I think, in some of these. To see the scaling.
I know people talk about that in the school sector as well, the constant reinvention or downloading and tinkering of resources, which is, you can see it both ways, because then it's sort of making that your own, but
I completely agree. Everybody's special. Everybody's got to have an exception. And, we can't possibly do that because we're special.
Exactly.
Yeah,
although I do think you face that challenge, because what our students want is wow.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you implement big systems across an institution, people think, it's going to come down to the common denominator. And I never think when we're teaching there's that common denominator. I always think there's that potential for wow, and anything we should be doing should enable that to happen. Particularly because we're talking about the research and teaching side today, not necessarily the research side. We're very complex institutions, but students want wow.
Okay, what else do we have up there? Beyond the current forms of e-assessment, which changes do you expect as technology changes? So we've talked a little bit about AI and how that might have a knock-on with assessments. Any others that you're kind of...
Following on from my wow, I think if we actually look at the student experience and personalisation, we're still personalising within the systems that and the frameworks that we have in place. So you've got your semesters, you've got your assessment points. If I'm going to go and get my driving licence, for example, I can go into a test centre, pay my 30 quid, and I can do my exam anytime I want. And then I can go and do something else. So I'm not trying to sort of say that we should look at assessment, which is very complex in such a simplistic way, but I do think there's something about the pace and enabling students to learn and to be assessed and to move on and to have their priorities, perhaps more geared to the 21st century. I still think we're delivering a 20th century model.
So I think, if I understand correctly, Coventry might be speaking a little bit about this idea of, will technology get to the point? I think there's someone here from Deakin who came across, but where you can enrol at any time, and we're not stuck in these structures. But
that's right, and the ability. I mean, Deakin do that; they have enrol any time. Yeah. We have subsidiaries that recruit 6 times a year. You can start at 6 points a year. We have on the main campus 3 points a year. So I think that will come. I agree with Chris. Actually, I think the biggest challenge will be assessment for us. I think we're still. I think if you look at satisfaction with assessment, it's still the lowest performing area of universities. I think I agree that we're still in the kind of, last century really with assessment, and I think that's the biggest challenge. I don't think the tools there are yet there to allow us to assess efficiently.
I think it's the staff mindset,
It's
isn't
the
there?
mindset.
It's the mindset. We
thing.
completely changed our assessments and feedback policy to enable doing things with, Google Cardboard, with technology, with personalised tech. There's very few people have kind of stepped up and taken that opportunity yet, and that's one of the things we're working really hard to look at.
I can give you a small anecdote from the University of London. I think it was, about 1880 or something, that the University of London started doing distance learning. And it took 3 months. The first set of exams were in the Seychelles. And it took 3 months for the exam scripts to be shipped out to the Seychelles. It took 3 months for the exam scripts to be shipped back to the UK for marking, and then 3 months for the marks to go back to the candidates that had sat the exams. And that model, whilst it has been speeded up by DHL and other things, is pretty much the same. We've got over 100 examination centres around the world where students are sitting exams simultaneously. The logistics of that is an absolute nightmare, particularly when you have some countries that we've just had recently in Sri Lanka, where there have been curfews about public assembly, and examinations have had to be cancelled, and so how do you manage that? So technology certainly has got a huge part to play in assessment, but to bring it about, to have students sit in front of a terminal and sit an exam, and you can be assured that that is the student that actually registered and is not an imposter, to ensure that those marks are then assembled and either printed or scanned back to the centre, which I think was probably the first start, or actually are sort of assembled back in the UK for marking. The assessment of it as well. What role does technology have in determining through artificial intelligence one essay against another? You can do it in terms of multiple choice, very straightforward. You can do it with very simple questions, but how do you mark an essay? And also, I think, how can you reassure the quality to your trustees, to your organisation, and the status of your institution relies on that quality mark. And we've seen how some institutions have failed, like the University of Wales, failed because it lost control of its quality. So this goes right to the heart of what a university is, and the digital world has a huge part to play in this particular part of the university process. There are huge advantages in using IT in it, but there are also huge risks, and that's why I think it's the biggest challenge coming up.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a session on blockchain later, so that bit about identity, perhaps we can have a good debate around that as well. Last few minutes, so this is a good one. Could anyone please comment on overcoming challenges related to legacy tech and legacy thinking? Yes, that's the thing. And I'm sure everyone in this room, that's the thing, isn't it? They go into these meetings really optimistic, really hopeful, have worked on these business cases, and perhaps go home at night thinking, that didn't go as I wanted. And it's a kind of, it's kind of how to manage this thing. If I put it another way, are there certain terms which sort of create, this absolute sense of horror in some of the meetings you've got? So I used to work in a book publishers, and it was before Kindle, and someone mentioned a blog, and the publisher nearly spat his tea out. And it was like, now that just seems like so ludicrous. So, when's enough? Is it okay for people to say, oh, I don't do tech? Or, how do we sort of bring those teams either with us, or when's enough?
It's never enough, is it? This is an iterative world. There's no end point. You're evolving the whole time, and the digital world is evolving. Humans' interaction with the digital world is evolving. I was struck by something I learned earlier, that the UK is the first country to create a UK data ethics board, and I think that is a very big evolution, because technology is impacting our lives. And we've got to remember that humans are in control of this, not.
I didn't agree with the point yesterday that we might want Sheryl Sandberg as a PC. No, this is not a good idea.
But no, I think we evolve, and I don't think there's an end point. It's just a continual evolution.
I'm quite struck though that, I mean, most things are kind of a bell-shaped curve, aren't they? So you've got the early adopters, and then you've got like your solid citizens, and then you've got some laggards, and I think within higher education in particular, I think we haven't yet got the construct around learning being a team sport. So what you might get from your rock star professor and talking about the thing that is so passionate and they are leading expert, and how that primes you to be really excited, and then how you might then go and search and work with a learning technologist to assemble content, and how you might work with a librarian, and so actually thinking about our organisations, not that you've got to turn every single faculty member into this digital kind of native. You're not going to do that. That's not where you should be setting your goals. It's to think about how do we enable the student who's at the heart of this to make best, in terms of their own learning by accessing lots of different resources. And so you may have fewer of a particular staff group and more of different kinds of so it becomes a team sport, and I think that's for me a better model than thinking that everyone's got to be this digital kind of wow.
Yeah, agree. I believe it is going back to the beginning, right? And how do we drive, and how do you all drive this culture change within the institution, and also starting to think as, like you were saying, Wendy, in partnerships, but not so much in silos. And again, not thinking of data, being owned in specific departments, but more creating this culture of stewardship of data more holistically, which helps, drive some of this change. And like you said, some of this is, we have millennials now within these institutions, and they're embracing this already. So I think using them and harnessing them for this innovative thinking is really valuable, but it does take time. And it's not going to happen overnight. But I think that being able to embrace that and bring people along the journey, like we've all been talking about.
You and I were speaking about this yesterday. You might have a Gen Z student, and we had the student yesterday, Kath, talking about being at Cambridge, the lecturer for maths, very much a shoegazer, as it were, and maybe if that's the subject expert, maybe that's fine, but maybe you have someone additional who's really good at communicating those ideas. They work together. So I think on that note, I hate to get the last word in. We have reached time, so please let's give a big round of applause to our panellists. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for listening in, everyone. We're now up to 30 reviews on iTunes, so why not help us reach 50 by leaving your rate and review today? If you're interested in adult education or corporate training, and you're based in the UK, why not come along to the launch of our new podcast series, the VocTech Podcast, in Brixton in London on the 18th of September. A few days later, the EdTech Podcast will be recording live at Dare to Learn in Finland on the 20th of September, where I'll also be judging the Scandinavian entries for the Global EdTech Startup Awards. If you can't wait that long and you're back in the UK, check out the Association for Learning Technologies event on the 3rd to the 5th of September. And Didac India and the World Futures Forum take place from the 24th of September, with our planning for Reimagine Education in London in early December also shaping up. For all events, go to theedtechpodcast.com/events and get in touch if there are others we should add to our calendar. We're meant to be on a summer break, but we couldn't resist popping up a few bonus episodes before we kick off again in September. Until then, goodbye and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.